He took the wrong suitcase and found a life inside. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us get back to our main character. It started with a simple mistake. The night air at JFK Airport was thick with rain, glistening on the glass walls as travelers hurried through the terminal. Ethan Hayes clutched his boarding pass in one hand and his phone in the other, his mind spinning with worry. 32 years old, a lawyer who had just lost his job, drowning in student loans, and trying to cover his mother's medical bills. He was tired, distracted, desperate to make it home before the hospital called again. When the luggage carousel began to move, he grabbed the first black suitcase that looked like his scuffed edges, red tag, and rushed out into the storm. He had no idea it was the worst, and best, mistake of his life. By the time he reached his small apartment in Queens, the rain had turned to a steady downpour. He tossed the suitcase onto the couch, kicked off his wet shoes, and went to make instant noodles. But something about the case caught his eye. It was newer, sleeker, heavier than his old one. When he unzipped it, he froze. Inside were neatly folded silk dresses, a velvet jewelry pouch, and on top, a leather folder stamped Wexler Hotels. He opened it. Dozens of documents. Contracts. Signatures. And right there, at the top of one page, marriage agreement confidential. His name was not on it, but someone else's was. Clara Wexler. Ethan frowned. He had seen that name before. The billionaire heiress, CEO of one of the largest hotel chains in the country. He laughed quietly, shaking his head. What kind of world had he stumbled into? He tried to call the airport, but it was after midnight. No answer. He decided to return the suitcase first thing in the morning. But morning never waited for him. A sharp knock echoed through his apartment before sunrise. Ethan opened the door to find a woman standing in the hallway, soaked from the rain, wearing a long black coat and heels that had seen better days. Her eyes were sharp, commanding, the kind that did not ask permission. "Mr. Hayes," she asked. "You took something that belongs to me." He blinked, confused. Who was going to return it? She stepped inside without waiting. Her gaze landed on the open suitcase, the papers still spread out. For a moment, the air froze. Then she turned to him, her tone clipped but deliberate. "You have seen the file." Ethan swallowed hard. "By accident." Clara exhaled, tension flickering behind her calm exterior. "Good. Then you know what is at stake." She picked up the contract, smoothed its corner, and looked at him with a strange, assessing calm. "I need someone to play my husband," she said. "Just for 3 months." Ethan blinked again, certain he had misheard. "Excuse me?" She met his gaze evenly. "My shareholders are threatening to remove me. They believe I am unstable after my fiancé backed out of our engagement. The company needs to see stability. So, here is my offer. You sign this contract, pretend to be my husband for 90 days, and I will pay off your debts in full." Ethan stared at her, speechless, torn between disbelief and temptation. The rain beat harder against the window, a dull heartbeat echoing in the silence. Finally, he said, "You do not even know me." Clara's lips curved slightly, not in amusement, but in understanding. "Exactly," she replied. "That is why this can work." And that was how it began, the contract, the lie, and the most unexpected truth of Ethan Hayes' life. Ethan could not believe what he had agreed to. The next morning, he found himself standing in the marble lobby of Wexler Tower, a place so polished and silent that even his own breathing sounded too loud. A tall assistant named Martin handed him a folder labeled Orientation. Inside were schedules, event invitations, and a typed list of rules for his new role as Clara Wexler's husband. Clara arrived a few minutes later, sharp and immaculate in a white suit, the kind that made people step aside without being asked. "You will need to sign the confidentiality agreement first," she said, her tone calm but firm. Ethan did as instructed, feeling the weight of every signature. "Good," she continued. "Now you will meet my legal team and our public relations director. You will also get fitted for a tuxedo. The first event is in 3 days." Ethan nodded, unsure if this was a dream or a contract with the devil. As they walked down the hallway, Clara's heels clicked like a metronome against the marble floor. "You do not have to talk much," she said. "Just smile, stay by my side, and let people believe what they want to believe." He gave a half-smile. "I am good at being invisible." She glanced at him for the first time with something softer than calculation. Then this might actually work. For the next several days, Ethan's life changed at a dizzying pace. Stylists adjusted his suit, photographers rehearsed his angles, and an etiquette coach drilled him on how to greet senators and billionaires. Every night he returned to the small guest room of Clara's penthouse, staring at the skyline that looked close enough to touch but still impossibly far away. The contract had rules. No intimacy. No personal questions. No real emotions. But reality had its own plans. One evening, as they rehearsed answers for an upcoming gala, the lights flickered during a thunderstorm. Clara, usually composed, froze when thunder shook the windows. Ethan saw her hands tremble slightly before she hid them behind her back. "You are afraid of storms," he said gently. Her eyes flicked toward him, defensive at first, then resigned. "I was in a plane once," she admitted quietly. "We lost an engine in midair. Ever since then, thunder makes me feel like I am falling again." Ethan hesitated, then reached for the remote and dimmed the lights. "You are not falling now," he said. "You are home." The silence that followed was different, softer, human. For the first time, Clara smiled, small and unguarded. "You are better at this than I expected," she said. The next day came the gala, a grand hall filled with crystal chandeliers and camera flashes. Reporters whispered, "That is him, the mystery husband." Ethan wore his new tuxedo and tried to remember every lesson. Clara slipped her hand through his arm and whispered, "Breathe. You belong here tonight." When a board member sneered, "So this is the man who tamed the Ice Queen," Ethan felt her tense beside him. He looked the man in the eye and said, "I did not tame her, I just remind her that even ice can shine." The remark drew laughter, then applause. Clara blinked, startled but impressed. For the first time, the two of them looked like a real couple. Later that night, as the guests left and the chandeliers dimmed, Clara turned to him on the balcony overlooking the city. The wind brushed her hair loose, and for once, her eyes were not made of steel. "Why did you really say yes, Ethan?" she asked softly. He looked at the lights below and said, "Because I needed money. But now, I think I needed something else too." "What is that?" she asked. He met her gaze. "A reason to start over." She said nothing for a long moment, then simply nodded. Somewhere deep inside, the contract that began as a business deal had already started to feel like the beginning of something real. The weeks that followed felt like living inside a script Ethan had never auditioned for. Every morning began with headlines about the mysterious husband of Clara Wexler, and every night ended with him removing the wedding band that was never meant to symbolize love. Yet, in between the staged smiles and the flash of cameras, something subtle began to shift. Clara no longer treated him like an employee. She started asking about his day, about his mother's recovery, about the small things no one else cared to ask. One morning, he found her in the kitchen, barefoot, trying to make coffee. The smell of burnt beans filled the air. He laughed softly. "You know, for someone who runs an empire, you are terrible with a coffee machine." Clara looked up, pretending to glare. "I am used to having staff for that." "Then let me," he said, stepping in to show her. Their hands brushed, and the silence between them said more than any contract ever could. By the end of the week, they had fallen into a rhythm that almost felt like a marriage: morning coffee, quiet drives to events, shared glances that lingered longer than they should. One evening, Clara invited Ethan to her private office at Wexler Tower. On her desk lay a sealed envelope stamped "Annual Board Meeting." She handed it to him. "Tomorrow will decide everything," she said. "If the board believes the marriage is a facade, I lose control of the company." Ethan nodded. "Then let us make them believe." The next day, the boardroom glimmered with glass and chrome, filled with shareholders old enough to be Clara's parents. Ethan stood beside her as she presented quarterly results with poised confidence. But halfway through the meeting, a gray-haired man named Victor Lang, one of the major investors, leaned forward. "Mrs. Wexler," he said, his tone sharp, "there are rumors that your marriage is not legitimate. That this man," he gestured toward Ethan, "is an actor you hired." The room went silent. Cameras clicked. Ethan felt every eye turn toward him. He could have denied it calmly, professionally, but instead, he reached for Clara's hand. "Rumors are easy," he said. "What is harder is finding someone who believes in you when the whole world does not. She did that for me. I am proud to stand beside her, contract or not." His words landed like thunder. For a moment, even Victor had no response. Then the chairman cleared his throat. "Well, the numbers speak for themselves. Wexler Hotels is thriving under Mrs. Wexler's leadership." Meeting adjourned. As the board filed out, Clara turned to Ethan, her expression unreadable. "You did not have to say that," she whispered. "I know," he said. "But it was true." Later that night, Clara found him on the balcony again, sleeves rolled up, city lights reflecting in his eyes. "Do you ever miss your old life?" she asked. "Sometimes," he said. "But maybe it had to fall apart so I could find this one." She looked at him for a long time, then said quietly, "You are nothing like the people I work with." "Is that good or bad?" he asked. "It is dangerous," she said with a faint smile, turning away. The wind caught her hair, and before she walked back inside, she added, "Tomorrow, I am visiting my mother's estate in Connecticut. Come with me. It is time you saw where all of this began." Ethan hesitated, then nodded. For the first time, she was inviting him into her real life, not the one in press releases, but the one behind the iron gates and old memories. He knew that whatever he found there would change everything. The drive to Connecticut took 3 hours, long enough for the city skyline to dissolve into quiet countryside and rolling green hills. Clara sat in the back seat beside Ethan, her posture still elegant but her silence heavy. The estate appeared through the fog like a memory carved in stone, a mansion surrounded by willow trees and iron gates that creaked open with a groan. Ethan stepped out first, taking in the cold air scented with rain and pine. "This place looks like it remembers everything," he murmured. Clara gave a faint smile. "It does. Every mistake, every victory, every lie." Inside, the halls were lined with portraits her parents, board members, ancestors who built an empire from hospitality and ambition. Yet, the house felt more like a museum than a home. "My mother passed here," Clara said quietly. "She wanted me to live freely, but my father wanted power. When he died, I inherited both the company and his enemies." Ethan listened in silence, sensing for the first time the weight she carried. Later that evening, they sat by the fireplace. Clara poured herself a glass of wine, her hand trembling slightly. "You said you wanted to start over," she said. "What does that mean for someone like you?" Ethan stared into the flames. "It means forgiving myself for not saving my father. For letting my mother fight alone. For giving up before I should have." Clara turned toward him, eyes softening. "You are not the only one who has tried to outrun the past." The storm outside deepened, thunder rolling like distant drums. The power flickered, and for a moment the room plunged into darkness. Ethan reached for her hand on instinct. "It is all right," he said. "I am here." When the lights returned, she did not pull away. Hours later, they walked through the garden, damp with rain, the moonlight glinting on wet roses. Clara stopped by a marble bench. "Do you know why I built hotels?" she asked. Ethan shook his head. "Because I thought if I gave people beautiful places to rest, maybe I would finally find one for myself." Her voice trembled, but she smiled before it could break. Ethan wanted to say something, but words felt too small. Instead, he took off his jacket and placed it over her shoulders. "Then rest now," he said softly. "Just for tonight." She looked at him, startled by the gentleness in his voice. "You should not care this much," she whispered. "It is not part of the contract." "Maybe not," he said. "But it is part of being human." The next morning, Clara's assistant arrived with urgent news. A video had surfaced online, grainy footage of a man leaving a casting agency months ago. The headline read, "Clara Wexler's husband exposed the actor behind the lie." Ethan stared at the tablet, frozen. "That is not me," he said. "Someone faked this." Clara's expression was unreadable. "The press will not care about the truth." By afternoon, every news outlet had the story. Social media exploded. Hashtags accused Clara of manipulating shareholders with a staged marriage. Investors demanded explanations. Ethan followed her into the study, where phones rang non-stop. "Let me fix this," he said. "How?" she snapped. "By telling them you are not an actor? They will not believe you." Her voice cracked, frustration mixing with fear. "I trusted you, Ethan. Now everything I have built is collapsing." He took a step closer. "I would never hurt you." "Then why does the world think you did?" she said, tears threatening but never falling. The storm had moved from the sky into their hearts. When she finally turned away, her words cut clean. "I need you to leave tonight." Ethan wanted to argue, but he saw it in her eyes the wall had gone back up. Without another word, he packed his things, including the contract that had started it all, and walked out into the rain. As the mansion faded behind him, he realized that for the first time, it did not feel like pretending anymore. What hurt most was that the love that had grown from a lie now felt like the only real thing he had ever known. Days turned into weeks, and the silence that followed felt heavier than any storm. Ethan moved back to his small apartment in Queens, the same one where everything had begun. The city noise was louder now, less forgiving. Every time his phone buzzed with a news alert, his stomach tightened. Clara Wexler's empire was unraveling. Stock prices dropped, board members resigned, and reporters camped outside her penthouse demanding answers. Ethan wanted to call her, to explain again that the video was fake, but she had blocked his number. Instead, he wrote letters he never sent, stacking them neatly on the table beside his mother's medical bills. One evening, as he watched rain streak the window, Martin, Clara's assistant, appeared at his door. He looked exhausted, his usual composure gone. "She is not eating," he said. "She will not speak to anyone. I thought you should know." Ethan stood frozen. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you are the only one she ever looked at like she saw something real." That night Ethan could not sleep. He replayed every moment, the laughter over burnt coffee, the quiet storm in Connecticut, the way she looked at him before she broke. He realized something he had been too afraid to admit: he had fallen in love with a woman who believed in control but needed kindness. The next morning, Ethan walked into Wexler Tower unannounced. Security tried to stop him, but Martin waved him through. He found Clara in her office, standing by the window with dark circles under her eyes. "You should not be here," she said quietly. "Neither should you," he replied. "You are hiding from a lie instead of fighting it." She turned sharply. "There is nothing left to fight for." Ethan stepped closer. "There is. The truth." He placed a flash drive on her desk. "Security footage from the casting agency. It shows the real actor, the man in the fake video. I hired a private investigator." His name is Leo Stanton. He was paid by Victor Lang. Clara's eyes widened. Victor? He wanted to take your company, Ethan said. He planted the evidence. For the first time in weeks, hope flickered behind her exhaustion. Together, they went to the board meeting that afternoon. The room was tense, filled with murmurs and flashing cameras. Victor sat at the head of the table, smug and confident. Clara walked in beside Ethan, her chin high, her voice steady. Before you cast another vote, she said, watch this. The footage played. It showed Victor's assistant handing Leo Stanton an envelope, then the same actor recording the fake interview. The room erupted in whispers. Clara looked directly at Victor. You wanted to destroy me with a lie. Now you can watch the truth do its job. The chairman stood, furious. Mr. Lang, you are hereby suspended pending investigation. Security escorted him out as the cameras rolled. When the room cleared, Clara turned to Ethan. You did not have to do this, she said. I wanted to, he replied. Because I meant every word I said that day. I was proud to stand beside you. She took a step closer, her voice softer now. You still can. Later that night, they stood again on the same balcony where so many unspoken words had hung between them. The city lights below shimmered like a sea of forgiveness. Clara reached into her pocket and pulled out the contract. This started as business, she said, tearing it in half. But I cannot pretend anymore. Ethan looked at her, his heart beating like thunder. Neither can I. For the first time, there were no cameras, no lies, no signatures, only two people who had learned the hard way that truth is the only foundation strong enough for love. When Clara placed her hand in his, he smiled faintly. So what happens now? She laughed, a sound he had missed more than he realized. Now, she said, we start over. For real this time. And as the rain began to fall again, soft and forgiving, Ethan knew the mistake that once changed his life had finally led him exactly where he was meant to be. The scandal faded as fast as it had begun, and for the first time in years, Wexler Hotels was free from the shadow of doubt. But more importantly, Clara was free from the walls she had built around herself. Weeks passed, and the city began to feel different. Lighter. The headlines now read, Clara Wexler restores her legacy, but no one knew the quiet truth that it was not a legacy she had saved, but her heart. Ethan became her silent partner, not in business, but in rebuilding life itself. Every morning, he brought her coffee the way she liked it, with sugars, no milk. Every evening, they left the office together, walking through the streets like two ordinary people who had fought extraordinary battles. One night, as they walked through Central Park, Clara paused by a street musician playing violin under the glow of a lamppost. The melody was gentle and familiar. My mother used to love this song, she said. Ethan listened as she closed her eyes. She used to say love is not something you plan, it is something that happens while you are busy pretending it will not. He smiled. She sounds like someone who knew you better than anyone. Maybe, Clara said softly. But she never met you. The words hung between them, fragile and real. Ethan reached for her hand, and she let him. For once, there was no pretense, no contract, only quiet certainty. Days turned into months, and the city slipped from winter into spring. Ethan's mother recovered fully, thanks to Clara's silent support with the hospital bills. When he tried to thank her, she only said, "You gave me something I could not buy, peace." One afternoon, Clara surprised him with a visit to a small art gallery downtown. "I have something to show you," she said. Inside, one of the walls displayed photographs from Wexler Hotel's new charity program and initiative called Open Doors, dedicated to helping single parents and veterans rebuild their lives. In the center of the exhibit hung a framed newspaper clipping, "He took the wrong suitcase and found a life inside." Ethan laughed softly. "You kept that headline?" "I thought it was poetic," she said. "You found my suitcase, and somehow, I found myself." That evening, they returned to her penthouse, where a dinner table was set for two. Candles flickered, casting gold against the glass walls. Clara poured wine, her hand steady this time. "Do you remember what you said to me the first night we met?" she asked. Ethan thought for a moment. "I said it was the worst mistake of my life." She smiled. "It turned out to be the best one of mine." They both laughed quietly, the kind of laughter that comes only when pain has finally turned into peace. After dinner, Clara walked to the balcony, looking out at the skyline. Ethan followed, standing beside her as the wind carried the hum of the city below. She turned to him, her expression serious but warm. "You once said you needed a reason to start over," she said. "Have you found it?" Ethan met her gaze. "Yes. You." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Clara reached into her pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Ethan froze. "Wait, are you?" She opened it. Inside was the same silver wedding band from their contract, polished, gleaming under the city lights. "I never returned it," she said. "Maybe it is time we use it for the right reason." Ethan laughed under his breath, his heart pounding. "Clara Wexler, are you asking me to?" "Yes," she said, cutting him off gently. "But this time, no lawyers, no cameras. Just us." He took the ring, slid it onto her finger, and whispered, "Then this time, I am not signing a contract. I am making a promise." The wind stirred around them, carrying the scent of rain and something new. Below, the city shimmered like 1,000 small beginnings. For Ethan and Clara, the wrong suitcase had not only changed their paths, it had written their story, one built not on wealth or status, but on the courage to choose truth over fear and love over pride. And for the first time, both of them finally understood what it meant to find a life inside. Months later, the wedding took place quietly at a small coastal chapel in Maine. There were no reporters, no photographers, no board members, just the sea breeze, a few close friends, and two people who had already walked through fire together. Clara wore a simple ivory dress, her hair loose, the same way Ethan liked it when she was home and not the CEO everyone else saw. As she walked down the aisle, Ethan felt time slow. Every mistake, every storm, every sleepless night had led to this moment. When the officiant asked if they came freely, Clara squeezed Ethan's hand and said, "Freely, completely, and finally." The room filled with quiet laughter and soft applause. After the ceremony, they stood on the rocky shore outside the chapel, the wind tangling Clara's veil around them. Ethan brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Remember the night you told me you were afraid of storms?" he said. She smiled. "Yes. You are the calm after mine," he whispered. She laughed softly and leaned against him, her voice carried away by the waves. "Then let us never fear the rain again." Their honeymoon was not extravagant. They rented a small cabin by the lake, spent mornings cooking pancakes, and evenings sitting on the porch watching the sun dip below the trees. Clara, who had once lived by schedules and contracts, now lived by the rhythm of peace. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Ethan looked at her and said, "Do you ever miss the life before all this?" She thought for a moment. "Sometimes. But then I remember how lonely it was to be admired but never truly seen." She looked at him and smiled. "You saw me." He reached for her hand. "And I will keep seeing you, every day." Months turned into a year. The world had moved on to new headlines, but for Ethan and Clara, life had finally become their own story. Wexler hotels thrived again, not from manipulation or control, but from authenticity. Clara opened a new foundation that helped employees start small business as a reflection of what she had learned about second chances. At the grand opening, Ethan stood in the crowd, watching her cut the ribbon. When she looked at him across the room, her eyes said what no speech could. Later that night, they returned home, their home, where everything had begun again. On the shelf sat the old suitcase, now polished and framed in glass. Inside it was not the old contract or jewelry, but something new, a collection of letters Ethan had written but never sent during their time apart. Clara had found them and kept them there as a reminder. "Why do you still keep that?" Ethan asked. She smiled. Because it reminds me that sometimes, the wrong choice leads you to the right person. He laughed, pulling her close. Then here is to every wrong suitcase, every wrong turn, and every right ending. Outside, rain began to fall, light and steady, tapping softly against the windows. And this time, they did not run from it. They stood together, watching the rain, knowing that every drop carried the memory of where they had been and the promise of everything still to come. A year after their quiet wedding, life had settled into something simple, something real. Ethan and Clara had turned their home into a place filled with warmth instead of wealth. Every Sunday morning, they walked to the same cafe by the river where no one cared who they were. Clara would order black coffee, and Ethan would always forget to ask for decaf, pretending he had meant to. They would laugh about it every time. For the first time, love felt ordinary, and that was what made it extraordinary. But peace has its own tests. One afternoon, as Clara was leaving the foundation's office, Martin rushed in with a worried look. "There is something you should see," he said. He handed her a letter marked with the Wexler Hotel's seal. It was from the board, requesting her presence at an emergency meeting. That night, Ethan found her pacing in the study, the letter open on her desk. "They want to remove me as chair," she said quietly. "They think I have turned the company into a charity." Ethan frowned. "You have made it better, not weaker." "They will not see it that way," she replied. "They want profits, not purpose." He stepped closer, placing his hand on hers. "Then show them that purpose can be profitable. You built this company once. You can redefine it again." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "You are right, I will not let them take this away." The next morning, she entered the boardroom wearing confidence like armor. Cameras flashed as she walked in, Ethan by her side. Victor Lang's replacement, a cold-faced executive named Deborah Kane, opened the meeting. "Mrs. Wexler," she said sharply, "you have been using company resources for social programs that have not generated financial returns. The shareholders demand answers." Clara stood tall, her voice steady. "You are right. The old model was about profit. But the new model is about value, real, human value. Our employees are not numbers. They are people. And when you invest in people, profit follows." Murmurs rippled across the room. Deborah smirked. "Fine words, but do you have proof?" Clara gestured to Ethan, who rolled in a large monitor. "We do." The screen came to life, showing footage of former employees who had started small businesses through the foundation. One woman tearfully thanked Wexler Hotels for helping her send her daughter to college. Another spoke about hiring veterans. The final image was a new hotel sign that read, "Wexler Open Doors, Open Hearts." The room fell silent. One by one, the shareholders began to nod. Finally, the chairman said, "Motion to retain Clara Wexler as chairwoman. All in favor?" Hands rose around the table. The motion passed unanimously. As they left the building, reporters surrounded them, shouting questions, but Clara only smiled. "The company is safe," she whispered to Ethan. "No," he said softly. "It is alive." That evening, they returned home and sat by the window as the sunset painted the sky in gold. Clara looked at him and said, "You once told me love built on truth outlives contracts." Ethan smiled. "And now you have proven it." They raised their glasses to the fading light. For them, success was no longer about control or wealth. It was about faith, courage, and the life they had built from a single mistake that turned into forever. Years passed, and the world around them changed, but the life Ethan and Clara built together remained steady, rooted not in perfection but in truth. Their story had become something of a quiet legend in business circles, not because of the scandal that once defined them, but because of the way they had turned that scandal into something greater. Every year on the anniversary of the foundation's first project, they would return to the small town in Maine where they had been married. They would visit the little coastal chapel and then walk along the same rocky shore where she once told him she was no longer afraid of storms. This time, though, Clara's hair carried a few strands of silver, and Ethan's smile had more lines of laughter than worry. You know, he said as they stood by the water, I used to think success was about getting everything right. She smiled. And now? He looked at her. Now I know it is about getting one thing right, and that was you. Clara laughed, her voice soft against the wind. You always did know what to say. They sat on the rocks and watched the tide move in and out, like time itself breathing around them. In the distance, children from one of the company's scholarship programs played near the shore, their laughter carrying through the air. Clara watched them with quiet pride. That, she said, pointing toward them, is what legacy really means. Ethan nodded. Open doors, open hearts. Later that evening, they hosted a small celebration at the local inn. The staff had decorated the room with photographs from their journey, Clara's first board meeting after the scandal, the launch of the foundation, and a framed copy of the newspaper headline that started it all, "He took the wrong suitcase and found a life inside." Guests toasted to their story, but for Ethan and Clara, the greatest toast was unspoken, the one that lived between their smiles. As the night quieted, Ethan led her outside where the ocean shimmered beneath the moonlight. He took her hand. Do you ever think about how everything could have been different if I had not grabbed the wrong suitcase that night? Clara smiled and shook her head. No. Because the right story always finds you, even through the wrong beginning. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and for a long moment, they simply listened to the waves. Ethan whispered, You know, I still have that old suitcase. I know, she said. And I am glad you never let it go. He smiled. Neither will I ever let go of this. She looked up. This? Us, he said, the life we built, the lessons we learned, and the love that was never supposed to happen but did anyway. The wind stirred gently, carrying the sound of the ocean and the echo of their laughter. As the screen of their story faded to black, Ethan's final words lingered like a quiet promise. In the end, it was never about the suitcase. It was about finding the person who made every mistake worth it. And with that, their story closed where it began, with one wrong suitcase that led to the right forever.